Well, at the beginning of the year, this date was put in the diary for our KingsGate celebration, a big banquet feast that we were going to have to celebrate being family. Well, we all know that 2020 has not quite worked out like we thought, and so today you're hearing a message from me recorded, which is a less than ideal substitute for the party that we were going to have. However, it does give me an opportunity to speak to the KingsGate family, and particularly in the context of what we're going through at the moment, and just to share some of my thoughts in that regard. I am aware as well that we are having a number of people from around the world who are listening to our online messages, which is wonderful. And I'm also aware, though, that today might be quite an in-house message for the KingsGate family. But I hope that you will find something of what I'm sharing a blessing to you in your own context. Well, on Tuesday, we heard Boris Johnson speak about the tentative steps of lifting some restrictions, some significant changes, even if there is an element of caution involved as well. And it really did feel like we were entering into another phase of the lockdown, a slow return to some kind of normality. First thing I want to mention, though, is as we come to potentially the end of this first phase of the lockdown, these first 3.5 months, if you can believe it, has gone so quickly in some measure, that I want to say a huge well done to everyone in the church. I'm sure that there have been a range of experiences. Some have been difficult, some have been novel, but whatever your experiences have been, I want to say that the church has done well. It's not just a matter of that we've held together as a church, but actually there have been places where we have actually advanced, and that is reason for us all to be really encouraged. I was on a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago, and somebody in the Zoom call said it's been quite difficult that churches have been closed, at which point someone else on the Zoom call said, no, churches have not been closed, only the buildings have been. And I love that, because it highlighted the fact that the church is far more than the building and is not ultimately dependent on the building. And even though our building, the KingsGate building, has been used, one of the things I think we can all be very encouraged with is that KingsGate certainly has not closed down as a result of the coronavirus. So a big well done. The second thing is just to let you know that we as an eldership are meeting to, obviously in perfect social distance compliance, we are meeting to try and work out what are the next things we need to do as the restrictions are lifted piecemeal. What does that mean for us meeting together? And I want you to know that our desire is to meet together as soon as we can. However, we also want to be cautious and abiding with the government guidelines and sensitive and aware to vulnerable people who are in our midst and who are part of the family. So please pray for us as we try and find the right way, seeking God's wisdom in this space. But another thing I would imagine on many people's minds is what happens beyond the next 4 or 5 months? What happens in the medium to longer term? When do we return to normal might be one of the questions you have, or some of you might be thinking, well, I actually don't want to return to normal. And still more of you might be saying, I wonder what the new normal is going to be like. And it is my opinion that the COVID-19 virus and all the consequences around it have and is leaving a significant mark on our society, which we are going to feel for a long time to come. Now, I don't have the wisdom or the knowledge, if you like, to know exactly what the future is going to be. But there are some things I would just like to share about that to you today. So the first thing I want to mention to you is that in the midst of all this uncertainty, it is good to remind ourselves that the calling of the church has not changed. Over 2,000 years, the church has faced numerous challenges. There have been changes which have been subtle, and there have been changes which have been extreme, and yet nothing has changed the calling of the church. And for the churches that keep their eyes on Jesus, they are able to fulfill these callings, this calling, no matter what the circumstances or what the changes. Now, there's a very big question you may have as to actually what is the calling of the church, and I'm not going to go into all of that now, but I'd just like to highlight three particular areas. There is a calling for the church which is focused upwards. It's the call to worship and glorify God. I think it's the Westminster Catechism which says the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. There is an inward calling, if you like, for the church to disciple the believers and to encourage believers. And then there is an outward focus, an outward calling that the church has to take this incredible news of Jesus, the transforming gospel, to the world around us. And no matter what the change might be, the calling remains the same. And all churches that remain relevant, impactful, and full of life are those that embrace all aspects of this calling. The one I want to just touch on particularly today is to talk about that third aspect, the reaching out to the world around us, the outward focused nature of our calling or aspect of our calling. I want to mention that because often that is the one that is most difficult for churches, and it is also the one that we have been speaking about at KingsGate so much over the last 5 years. We've been saying that we want to become a church which is increasingly outward focused, looking to the world, looking at the world around us, loving the world around us. One of the things that I've mentioned is that it's a horrible thought to be a church that if we disappeared, no one would notice that we were there because we've never had an impact. We don't want to be like that. We want to be a church community which is radically impacting the world around us. And so we've been focusing on that and desiring to see that as part of KingsGate. One of the reasons that we multiplied into different communities was in order to see this take place. And it's been encouraging to see this becoming an increasing reality in the life of KingsGate. But then COVID-19 comes along. But here's the incredible thing. Rather than COVID-19 and the coronavirus causing us to become insular and to retreat, if you like, we've actually in many ways seen an acceleration and an advancing in our impact in the world around us. And I know when I say those words, many of you who are familiar with what's been taking place in KingsGate would most probably want to focus on the incredible things that have been taking place at the venue in Kingston. And I had a meeting today with a member of the council, just walking around with them and showing them the amazing things that are taking place. But it would be wrong just to focus purely on Kingston. In every single one of the communities, whether it's Ham, Cobham or Wimbledon Village, there have been expressions of reaching out and using these difficult times to reach out to the community. Whether it is using some of the bright boxes and the food boxes that have been produced in Kingston to be taken into the communities in Ham and Wimbledon Village and Cobham, whether it is running alpha courses or whatever it might be. When I've spoken to the people the guys who are leading the different communities and people in those communities, what I've been struck with is this posture of looking outwards, using these times to demonstrate the gospel to the world around us. And I just don't want to lose that. In fact, I want to build on everything that has taken place in the last 3.5 months. And sometimes when we want to rearrange church life in order to have a maximum impact on the world around us, it can be messy, it can be uncomfortable, but it is worth it. The next 18 months, we are going to see needs are not going to decrease, but actually the needs in our community are going to increase. There are going to be incredible opportunities for us as a church to serve and to help and to demonstrate Jesus to the communities and the people in our communities in which we live. And the churches that are going to flourish are going to be the ones that step into the gap and to serve. And that is something I want us as KingsGate to certainly do and be part of. There was a quote, quite a well-known quote by the Archbishop William Temple. I think it's William Temple. And and he says, he mentions this this quote, or it's a quote from him. It says, "The church is the only institution that exists primarily for the benefit of those who are not its members." And even if that is a slight oversimplification of things, I think there's a challenge in that statement, which is one that we all need to hear. And one of the things which I've noticed as I read books about churches and how churches thrive and why others don't, it's churches who have an outward focus, which are the ones that thrive the most. And in our consumerist and individualistic world, so often the conversation around churches can be about what I want, about what I need, and what I like. And but as Christians, one of the things we need to know and understand is that actually we're not the center of the story. When we lose sight of this, we get preoccupied with very peripheral questions like, what kind of worship do I like? How is the lobby sorted? Do my children enjoy the kids ministry? Has my home group leader contacted me this week? We become miserable, we become unappealing, and we become grumpy with each other. And we lose perspective because we were never meant to be a people who were navel gazers. We were meant to be a people who have been encouraged, excited, overwhelmed by an incredible call we have, which is so big, so vast, and is much bigger than our little worlds. So the first thing to mention is our calling has not changed. And over the last 3.5 months, it's been wonderful to see how KingsGate has demonstrated that, even though our circumstances have. Okay, the next thing I want to mention is that as we head into the months and even the years ahead, we cannot be overly precious about our past. We cannot be overly precious about the way we've done things and what things look like. Now, I think it's incredibly important to celebrate the journey that we've been on, to remember the great things that God has done for us, and to remember what our story is. I think that's biblical and it's important, and it's an important thing to do. But if we can take that to an illegitimate space, when we begin to worship our past, worship the way things were, we turn it into an idol, if you like. And if we do that, what will happen is we get stuck in a time warp of irrelevance. Now, what I'm not talking about and what I'm not anticipating is a complete deconstruction of how we do church. But what I am saying is, as we go into the challenges of the future and a changing landscape, I'm not sure that we're going to find all the answers of what God is calling us to, for what God is calling us to in the way that things were done in the past, by looking backwards. We are going to need to rely on the Holy Spirit to guide and lead us into the new things that God has for us. There are new wineskins we need for the new things that God has in store for the church. So yes, let's celebrate our past. Let's recognize how we are indebted to everything that we've been, but let us not turn it into an idol and be too precious about it. The next thing I want to mention is the extent to which we will flourish into the future will be strongly influenced by our ability to adapt, to be nimble so that we can take advantage of opportunities and changing circumstances. And one of the things I've been hugely pleased about is that over the last number of years, we at KingsGate have been very intentional about trying to make ourselves more flexible. We have streamlined our admin department. We have been conscious about trying to reduce our overheads and our costs to make ourselves more flexible, more nimble. And I do believe that is important, because the future is not about building large, cumbersome structures, but rather I believe that the future is about empowering everybody, a church empowered to take advantage of the opportunities that I believe are coming our way. And we can only do that if we are flexible and nimble. Then we can do that. So that's the next thing. I believe our flexibility to take advantage of those things is going to be key for us flourishing into the future. And then just a fourth thing, something that I've mentioned quite a bit, and you would have heard in a number of the messages. If one of the things I see for the future is not building cumbersome structures of church, but rather having an empowered people, a church of empowered believers taking advantage of the opportunities we have, that is going to require every single one of us to take ownership of our walk with God. You know, as I've said, we can so easily get into a space where our spiritual walk is basically based on our attendance of church on a Sunday. That becomes our little spiritual fill-up, and that's what keeps us going. In the future, as we go into the future, that is just not going to sustain us. We need to take ownership of our walk with God. So those are some of the points that our calling hasn't changed. We cannot be precious about the past. We need to be flexible to face the future, and we need to take ownership of our walk with God. And in preparing this talk, I was reflecting on the story of one of the passages from Paul's letter to 1 Corinthians. And in Paul's letter to 1 Corinthians, he says this, 1 Corinthians chapter 9 from 19 to 23. He says, "Even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with when I was with those who follow the Jewish law, I too lived under that law. Even though I am not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I am with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from the law so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God, I obey the law of Christ. And when I'm with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings." And one of the things which struck me about this passage is here you have Paul, a man whose entire life is now shaped and crafted around the calling that he has. He is incredibly precious about the gospel, but he is not precious about the past, and is willing to be flexible and to adapt in whatever circumstances he faces in order that his calling will be fruitful in the context in which he finds himself in. And that, in a nutshell, in a way, is what I am calling us to as KingsGate. To be, not to hark for the past, not to be overly precious for the past, to be flexible, to be precious about the gospel, so that we can fulfill the calling we have in whatever context we may find ourselves. All right, well, I hope you have found this a blessing, and may the Lord bless you, turn his face to shine upon you, and give you peace.